Hello, I'm Chris. This is Reality Shadow Ban. Yeah, the portal. Today I'm going to be reacting and watching together. I only watched a few minutes of this about Ray Dalio. I don't know if you know about Ray Dalio, but pretty interesting guy, hedge fund manager, and talks about the cycles, cycles of history, fourth turning, and but also I add the biohistory. If you haven't looked at that, that's an interesting thing to see where the cycles end, and it's going to be about this imaginary debt on unrepayable loans. So everybody talks about this national debt. Oh my God, it's so blah, blah, blah. And there is some issues because it does give value to the currency. I just was looking at some of these numbers. 97 trillion total U.S. As the U.S. total as like the Fed. This is nuts. So basically, this the United States has gone into the bankruptcy many times. And it's so sad that we don't know any of this stuff because it keeps doing the same stuff. And every time the restructuring happens, there's a massive transfer of wealth, and usually involves a new currency or new base. Um, Last time they did it, they went from the gold base, which they were already playing games with, to something that completely is detached from reality, which is this pure Keynesian model. So let's listen to what Ray Dalio has to say.
As of January 8th, 2024, the national debt in the United States has surged past an alarming $34 trillion. For many, that
Fair use, by the way, but yeah, I'm listening to this MHFIN channel.
huge number might seem distant, almost inconceivable without context. However, digging into this seemingly enormous figure unravels a profound and upcoming danger. This massive number not only signifies a financial burden, but also casts a shadow over the destiny of our nation and the legacies of generations to come. In today's video, we explore the alarming observations of Ray Dalio, a seasoned financial expert who for over 3 years has been sounding the alarm on the critical dangers lurking within the corridors of government, dangers that have specific consequences and look to threaten the entire financial ecosystem. Everything from stocks to real estate faces this serious threat when looked at through the prism of Dalio's warnings, signs that have roots in a problem that started.
Yeah, okay, so anytime you see a chart that goes this, that does this, this means that it's unsustainable. That's gonna have to get your tail off, like a sigmoid. Let me see if I can get a picture of what that is. So it's gonna either go up and tail off like this, or it's gonna go up and fall over. And Yeah, we'll see, right? But usually it's gonna go up and then go boop back down. But this thing is actually unsustainable now, and the thing about it, here's one of the key things that nobody ever talks about, is when the money is created at the Fed and all that, however the mechanism that they do where they create the money to loan, they don't create the interest. So it's a system that can actually never be repaid, even though it's all fake numbers. The interest payments will always be more than the money that's available in the system, because at the time the money is created, the interest is not created. So what that makes is a series of rolling bankruptcies, usually at the lower rungs of society. Now this is considered okay, broken window theory or Keynesian production model. I don't know what. It's insanity for me. I just think it's crazy that you can go around and break a window and that's actually positive GDP. But that's how they calculate that stuff. So that's insane. That's not real. That's not reality. That's not how things work. Now, if a window gets broken, okay, that's one thing. But it's not the same as someone going around breaking things. So a long way to say that all this stuff is completely fake. But what is real is that people believe it. And what is real is they use these things, these type of events, these type of it back in time in history. If you go look into the other bankruptcies that have happened in the United States and the restructurings and the other times we've had loans with these central bankers based on fiat and gold and whatever else they can get their hands on, which looks like they're going to do a CBDC and they're going to do a transfer of wealth using the information in the Great Taking. That you don't actually own as stocks and bonds; they actually already own them. So, they might do that, or they just inflate it away, and you're never going to see it. But this means that the system is at the end, and there is no way to unravel it. You can't unravel a Ponzi because of the fact that the interest is not in the system, it's not injected in the system. They have to print more to inject that in there, and they can just control it. So anytime they want, they can pull the plug. It seems like that's what they're doing right now. And
started in the early 80s and are only now starting to show symptoms of trouble. To understand just how severe this problem is, we first need to dive into a bit of history. Debt has always been a companion of the United States since its inception. This enduring presence has led many to perceive it as a familiar and perhaps harmless aspect of our national landscape. Now, without boring you to death, I'm going to avoid going.
I mean, it is when it's based on real stuff, right? Right? And that's why that usury interest stuff is a bad idea, is because it gets into the situation where it all gets vacuumed up by a tiny minority that have manipulated the system and knew from the beginning when they created the system that this is what it's for. This is how it works. This is what it does. And it does it intergenerationally so that nobody can figure out what's going on.
Going through the full history up until this point today, but what you have to understand is the key takeaway. Debt has always been woven into the fabric of this country's narrative. So now,
I mean, sort of. I mean, promissory notes were a thing, but that was based on a different kind of culture, a culture of mutual trust, not mutual distrust.
naturally, you might wonder, why worry now? After all, we've grappled with this challenge throughout our history and have always found a way forward. However, this is where we delve into the concept of debt spirals and how they've consistently played a role in the downfall of some of history's most significant and prosperous empires. And right now, we seem to be headed in that exact direction. You may call it far-fetched, but the signs are definitely there. You see, over time, as our debt exponentially expands, we as a nation will eventually reach a point where the amount necessary to service that debt becomes too large.
Right, because they choose not to put more money into the system to keep the interest payments. Interest payments going. That's really it.
I mean by this is simple. It's very easy to borrow money at favorable rates and good terms. But once the going gets rough and the interest rates increase, the burden becomes exponentially harder to pay. And we are
right, and they set the rate. So they have the lever to do this anytime they want. Looks like they're doing it now.
a lot closer to that than what you probably think. Right now, the United States spends $169 billion per year on interest expenses alone, which makes up around 16% of our annual budget. It's estimated that in 4 years, the government will spend 2 times more money on interest than it will on our entire military.
Think about that. 2 times more on interest, on the fake interest, on the fake loans, they were spending on the military. That's called a transfer. And transfers to who? Who owns the Fed? Nobody knows.
Path forward is clearly
That should be a clue.
unstable and poses a serious
No, not a clue. No,
risk to our
not a clue to what's going on. No,
entire financial system. To understand the
not a slave system. No, it's not a slave. No. Okay.
specifics and just how bad it will get, don't listen to me, listen to Dalio. He makes it very clear just how close we are to this dangerous scenario.
Are we in a debt crisis or are we headed for one? We are, in my opinion, we are at the beginning of a very classic late big cycle debt crisis when the supply-demand gap, when you're producing too much debt and you have also a shortage of buyers. What's happening now as we have to sell all this debt is we then do have enough buyers. There are changes now in terms of the quantities in the world that are being held by large investors around the world that have lost money in these treasury bonds and so on. And then there are geopolitical changes which are having an effect. Some cases, some countries are worried about sanctions. And then there's this geopolitical shift. So,
I mean, that's all manipulated as well, right? I mean, we have a limited amount of oil. It's not a rare thing. Stop. So, I mean, it's just total scam after scam after scam after scam. And this guy, of course, is a boomer, a blue pill boomer, and he's had success. Let's face it, he's success. And I do appreciate the fact he's like talking about these cycles. And I can't tell if he's skirting around these issues because I've listened to several presentations by him and he sort of says it, but he's like, okay, but it's like, but if you may be able to, it's like, no, this is all falling over. This is falling over. You cannot fix it. When it'll fall over, nobody knows. They could keep going. They could pull the lever back. They can push the lever forward, but they can they're doing the transfer, like Chad Elkins says, they can just use the interest to kill everybody and take everybody's stuff away in Minecraft, of course.
look at the supply-demand issue. There's a supply-demand issue for that debt. There's a lot of debt. It has to be bought, has to have a high enough interest rate. So a crisis, that's, if we continue down this path in terms of what's likely over the next, 5 and 10 years, then you reach the point that balancing act becomes very difficult.
How will we know? And is it really a function of not having enough buyers for the federal debt? Is there any evidence of that so far?
We're right at the brink of starting to find out that. The amount of selling of government debt collapsed, right? We didn't issue government debt. And now we're going to issue a lot of government debt. And so when we look at the buyers, there appears to be a significant shortage of the buyers for that government debt, but we're now at the brink of of being able to see what that supply-demand picture looks like as we go over the next year or two.
So you just heard Dalio there explain that the government sells its debt, and what he means by this is simple. When the government needs funds to cover its expenses, such as infrastructure projects or public programs, it often turns to the financial markets to borrow money. The mechanism it uses for this is selling government debt in the form of treasury securities. These treasury securities are essentially promises to repay a certain amount of money with interest over a specified period. The government issues different types, such as treasury bills, notes, and bonds, each with varying maturity dates. Investors, ranging from individuals to large financial institutions and foreign governments, purchase these securities. When these individuals or entities buy treasury securities, they are lending money to the government. In return, they earn interest on their investment. This process is how the government raises capital to finance its operations without relying solely on taxation. Now, obviously, the problem Dalio is talking about is that there is less and less demand for U.S. debt instruments. Now, if there is less demand for these IOUs, it means fewer people and investors are willing to lend money to the U.S. government. And of course, this is a big deal. When there's less demand for U.S. debt, it can lead to a few challenges. First, the government might have to offer higher interest rates to attract lenders because, like any product, if fewer people want it, you might need to sweeten the deal. Secondly, if the demand for U.S. debt keeps dropping, it might become harder for the government to raise the money it needs. Imagine if you needed a loan and fewer banks were willing to lend to you. It can make things more challenging financially. Now, let's tie it all together. As the federal government deficit grows significantly, the government is compelled to issue more debt instruments to bridge the gap between the taxes it collects and its annual spending. However, Ray Dalio's observation reveals a concerning trend: the diminishing demand for these debt instruments. When demand for these instruments drops, it triggers a critical consequence: the interest rates on these securities must rise. Considering that we are already allocating a substantial amount of funds to cover interest expenses, any further increase poses a serious threat to our economic stability. Elevating interest rates on government instruments tends to have a ripple effect, influencing interest rates across the board. If taken to
Yeah, because they're the one everybody gets the money from, ding dong. Come on, it's not influences. It's like that's the cheapest place to get the fucking money from, ding dong. What are you talking about, man? It's like influences. No, like
to an extreme, this situation can hinder economic growth, potentially leading to a recession. In essence, the
as kids is like must be a zennial or something, because maybe it's just shocking to him. It's like he still thinks the system works as advertised. It's like, no, man. They can pull the plug on this, and it looks like they're pulling the plug now because they got the CBDC thing locked up, and you got an account at the Fed already, and there's gonna be one bank, and you have one account, and everything's gonna be great. I'm sure.
intricate interplay between a soaring federal deficit, declining demand for debt instruments, and the necessity to raise interest rates on these instruments can create a delicate economic balance. Striking that balance is crucial to prevent adverse repercussions on the broader economy. Now, if we go down that road and things get ugly, what you tend to have are problems that are much worse than just plain financial. Take a listen to Dalio's explanation.
Given the challenges that we face, fiscal challenges that you describe, we need a political process that will help us get out of it. Do we have that? This goes to the second issue that you always deal with, which is internal conflict.
Well, the things that you see happen over and over again when you look at history is when you have a financial not good situation. At the same time as you have large wealth gaps, you start to see the emergence of populism. And
So he's talking about Turchin's work.
we see extremism
Turchin.
in both of the political parties. Okay, we see that split. A populist is an individual or a leader or a political person who will win at all cost. That the rules of the game don't as much matter. And so we're in the January 6th type.
Well, if the rules of the game are rigged, then the signal that's coming to this from the system is there is no system. You are now in an anarchic time, and now we pay the penalty for not understanding that the rules were there for a purpose, to avoid these situations and avoid people having bloodshed in Minecraft, allegedly.
Incident and so on is very interesting. The political system, in terms of primaries and the parties, tends to create that sort of polarity. I think that it's very clear that there is only one good outcome, if we can, and that's a strong bipartisan middle. Because either of the extremes is not going to be able to be dominant. The small right, or even the small left, and as a result, we're seeing a fragmentation. Geographically, you're seeing people move to different areas, not just because of taxes, but of differences in values and so on. And so you're seeing this separation. I think over the next
That's called balkanization. And it's the classic indication that there's going to be a little bit of troubles ahead. Yeah. I recommend moving to Mexico or out of the country and take advantage of the foreign earned income exclusion. And if you're self-employed or work for U.S. company and you can work remote, you can use the FEIE and deduct the first $120,000 of income off your federal income tax, and that's going to be about 20 grand, which will pay for your place in Mexico or wherever.
2 years. The real question is, can we have a strong bipartisan middle, or are we going to have that kind of fragmentation? We have three things aligning that are concerning. On this short-term debt cycle, I call it, the 7-year cycle, we're about halfway through. In other words, interest rates are now at a level that they're probably going to stay at, but they're probably not going to rise much from here, and there's tightness. And the consequences of that are going to be a weaker economy going forward. It doesn't have to be a big downturn because of the household sector, but it is a balance sheet kind of recession. And I think things are going to get worse in the economy. There's a financial issue at the same time as you have this internal conflict. So I think that's going to make for a risky situation.
Now,
Okay, that's a real nice way of saying that. A trouble's brewing. Yeah, I think this is all. I mean, it's just me, but I really do believe this is all by design because they keep talking about this 2030 target, and this is about the time when all this stuff will come to a complete mess, complete unresolvable mess by then. Where we'll have 100 trillion in debt, 200 trillion, 300 trillion, 400 trillion, a quadrillion. We'll hit the quadrillion. I mean, when it starts hawking sticking and you're doing in 1 month what you did in the last 50 years, come on. All right, and I'm going to stop it there. You can go watch. I'll put it in the show notes. You can go watch the rest of that video. And Ray Dalio is pretty good, but yeah, there we go.